After the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Really excited to be hosting this conversation today. It's, I think, personal for many of us on the call. I'm Danielle, and I lead APCO Impact, which is the Sustainability and Social Impact Group at APCO. Today, we are talking about the Marshall Plan for Moms and the research that we did with the Marshall Plan. It's called Making Workplaces Work for Moms. Hopefully, most of you have seen it by now. It's a playbook that we just published, which is a survey of over 1,000 moms, hundreds of academic studies that we researched, conversations with dozens of experts to really understand the barriers facing moms and what moms need to thrive at work. So just to help frame the conversation, because this is the number one question we get from everyone, we're defining mom as a caregiver who identifies as a woman and can be a mom either biologically or through adoption. So just want to say that up front because I know that's a very common question. So joining me today, if we want to just jump to the bio slide. I've got Reshma Sajani, who's a mom in New York and a leading activist behind the Marshall Plan for Moms and founder of Girls Who Code, who many of you I'm sure know. We'll hand over to Reshma in a second to share a little bit about the Marshall Plan, which is evolving very quickly into a trailblazing movement. And also joining me today is Marjorie Krause, who is a mom in Washington, D.C. and founder and executive chairman of APCO Worldwide. So I'm going to turn it over first to Marjorie to share a little bit about why we decided to take this on, and then we'll come back to Reshma to talk about the movement, and then I'll do a little bit of an overview of the survey findings and the research findings before getting into a discussion with the group. So Marjorie, I'm going to hand it off to you for a second.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a very important topic, and I've added to my credentials mom and grandmom. So I've seen this through 2 generations of people. When I started APCO, which is 37 years ago now, I started with taking this on with 3 school-age children. And so over the years, I think I've lived the experience we're going to talk about, because at that time, especially, things were, even if you could imagine, a little more difficult than they are today with balancing everything. At least today we get to have a discussion about it. It doesn't make life easier, but we can have a discussion and we can unite around encouraging employers to do more to support working mothers. So APCO started then, but it has remained women founded, but also majority women owned. And supporting gender equity and working mothers is in our DNA. If we don't get it, nobody's going to get it. I kind of feel like we have a responsibility to be in a leadership position and to be especially sensitive about the actions of working mothers. And you know, in consulting, that's particularly hard because even if we want to control people's schedules, sometimes it's not up to us. But we try to, as we take on any topics, combine our passion with data, insights, partnerships, and things that can come to conclusions. So we're not just talking in the abstract about things, but we can come up with ideas that help clients address the greatest challenges of our time, and we think that this is one of those. So why now? Why do this? I've been, as many people leading organizations, in lots of conversations with other people leading organizations during the pandemic, and I think almost universally there have been conversations about the unfortunate impact of the pandemic, especially on working mothers. And I think this picture is very suggestive that the only thing missing is also the dog scratching to go out while the 2 kids are in your lap and you're trying to work. Everybody has been teacher, mother, and worker at the same time, creating tremendous stress. And so a number of people, as you'll see, have chosen to drop out of the workforce for the time being. And I think that most employers recognize this is the moment in time. It's a moment in time, maybe that they're not thinking so much about what we're going to talk about today, but they are thinking about change. And they're realizing that they have to operate tomorrow in a different way than they did yesterday. And so I think this is a very significant moment to launch this effort, because people are aware of the need for change, and people have seen the impact of this. So I think if we can take this moment in time and put some tangible things in the hands of employers, we can, like the playbook, we can create a voice from the perspective of all moms and help create a path forward that will be better for everybody. And so we see the Marshall Plan as not just a movement, but as an opportunity for thousands of moms across the country to work together and ensure that their workplaces are more supportive and inclusive of them as caregivers. And so that is why we took this on. This is why we think it's important. And I think what the last thing I'll say is, I think what has also come to the forefront is this war for talent. And so it's very significant that what we don't want to do is lose the value of what all these working mothers have brought to the workforce and struggle to bring. And we want to find ways to make the workplace inclusive, to take advantage of the fact that we have a lot of talent out there that may not be tapped for reasons that can be fixed. And so that's kind of the mission here. And hopefully the Marshall Plan for Moms, and to commend all those behind it, and Reshma. This is an excellent way, I think, to bring our resources together and prod the system to take a big, giant step forward, which is needed.
Thanks, Marjorie. Reshma, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Marjorie, for sharing your story. I think it's so powerful and so important. I want to just start by going over this slide a little bit to talk about like context. So, we know that COVID-19 has taken a toll on moms in the workforce. It pushed out more than 2.3 million women, with 1.1 out of 4 moms signaling that they may downshift their career. And that 2.3 million number is really important, because we have to remember that January 1st, 2020, women made up 51% of the labor force. First time in the history of our nation. Today, our labor market participation is back where it was in 1989. So we've lost tremendous gains in a very short period of time. And we wrote this playbook to offer some suggestions, but the reality is that workplaces weren't getting it right to begin with. And there have always been inequalities that persisted in the workplace because of the gender inequality that was happening at the home. 50% of moms say that employers have to do more to get rid of the bias against mothers. 39% of moms we surveyed said they got little to no support from their employers. And 3 times as many working mothers were in heterosexual relationships said that they were responsible for the majority of housework and childcare. So that was certainly the case in my life. When I started 2020, I was just about to have a newborn baby. Girls Who Code, my organization, was one of the largest in the world. We had started that year with a Super Bowl ad. We were sailing. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is going to be the first time that I truly take a maternity leave, and I'm going to enjoy it. And that was the plan. And then March 9th rolled around, and as I sat there watching the world crumble, I knew that I had no choice. If I was going to save the decade-long work that I had done for Girls Who Code, I had no choice but to end my maternity leave and go back to work. And so that's what I did when my newborn son was a few weeks old. I went back to work. All the while I was homeschooling my 5-year-old and trying to save my nonprofit, because when pandemics hit, the first resources to go are those that are going to women and girls. And every day I would just end depleted. And when I looked on my Zoom screen, every mom looked exactly how I felt. And what we were saying to one another in chats or on phone calls late at night was like, you know what, let's just wait and see. When the schools open in September, when the schools open, everything will be okay. And when September rolled around, and I remember getting an email 2 weeks before schools were going to start for my public school principal saying, guess what? We've come up with this amazing program called hybrid learning, where you're going to log on your child on Zoom at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 12 o'clock, all the while maintaining your full-time job. I knew that like we were not going to get saved. And what happened in those early months in the fall too was that we started seeing this exodus of women from the labor market. The December jobs report, all the jobs lost were women. And that number, 2.3 million, again, labor market participation back where it was at 1980, that all happened in 9 months. So I remember thinking to myself in December, well, where's the plan? Like, where's the plan? Someone's got to have a plan. Like, you can't lose this many jobs this quickly without a plan. And when I turned around and looked, there was no plan. And so I remember speaking to some moms in my PTA and saying, well, what do you need to go back to work or to return to your mental sanity? And that's where the Marshall Plan for Moms was born. It came out of being an op-ed, which was just an idea of like, what are the 4 to 5 things that moms need to go back to work? And the first thing I heard from moms was, we need cash. Whether it was cash to pay the mortgage, pay for a tutor, not have to move in with your parents or go homeless. They needed money in their hands to make the decisions that they needed to make for their families. The second thing when I talked to women that they needed was paid leave and affordable childcare. My parents were refugees and my dad couldn't afford the $50 a week for childcare. And so from the time I was my son's age, 6 years old, I was a latchkey kid. And my dad would tie around, put a key around my neck, and I would walk the 15 blocks home because they couldn't afford to do anything else. And so many moms have, even before COVID, had to make choices like this. The third thing I heard from moms is we had to open up schools safely, 5 days a week. Because we didn't have a structure of care in our country, unfortunately, schools were a childcare option for so many parents. And when they shut down and COVID was happening, they couldn't have grandparents come in and daycare centers were shut down. They had no options but to reduce their hours or go on food stamps. The final thing that I heard from many moms were that our jobs are no longer going to exist. Because of COVID-19, so many jobs in retail, education, healthcare had been automated. And we knew that women suffer from automation jobs at 3 times the rate of men. And so if 70% of single households are run by women of color, where they are the sole breadwinner and the sole caretaker, we needed a federal plan to figure out how to get them back to work if they had a shot to going back into the middle class. And so that's what the Marshall Plan was. I wrote that op-ed and we followed up by taking a full page ad in the New York Times from 100 celebrities and activists, from Ai-jen Poo to Amy Schumer to Kerry Washington to Mindy Grossman to Jen Hyman, essentially saying we don't work for free. Moms can't continue to be America's social safety net. So we ignited a conversation about this because there's no way we can build America back better unless we build motherhood back better. And so our activism has resulted in 4 pieces of legislation, 2 bills introduced in the House and the Senate. We've had a handful of bills introduced across the country in Virginia, in New York, in California that are calling for a Marshall Plan for Moms task force. Again, Bill Gates once said, you cannot change what you cannot measure. And there's no way that this severe job loss is going to come back like this. We have to have a plan. And so we've done a tremendous amount of advocacy in the public sector. We've done a tremendous amount of advocacy on culture change, because here's the thing, moms in America are treated like martyrs. The reason why we didn't protest hybrid schooling, the reason why we've just kind of sucked it up and done all of it, we do 86% of the household labor at home, continue to maintain our full-time job, because that's the expectation of being a mother in America today. And guess what? It's not that attractive anymore. And it's why we have the lowest birth rate in the history of our country. When I talk to young women today, they don't want to have kids. And they don't want to have kids because they don't want to have kids. They don't want to have kids because it's too hard. And no society is productive with a declining birth rate. And the final, which is why I'm so excited about the work that we've done with APCO and the partnership and the incredible experience that we've had with this team, is that the private sector can truly ignite change. They can lead the way in rebuilding motherhood and rethinking how we think about childcare, how we think about paid leave, how we finally get rid of the motherhood penalty once and for all. And the playbook is a start to having that conversation. You know, there's that, I know sometimes I love it and sometimes I hate it, but like never waste a good crisis. Well, we have an opportunity to build back, you know, also our workplaces and make them work finally once and for all for moms. You know, I always say when we were preparing for the millennials coming, we got out the popcorn and the ping pong tables and we thought about, how do I prepare a workforce that's going to be attractive to this next generation? Well, guess what? We never did that for moms. We never thought about preparing or building a workforce that works for them. We got a second bite at that apple, and we have an opportunity to do that now. So I'm so excited about the work that we've done together, and I want to hand it off to you, Danielle, to talk about like what we learned.
Thanks, Reshma. Thank you for the impassioned overview. I'm excited to dig into a deeper conversation with you and Marjorie in a bit. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to go into a very high level overview of the findings. I just want to encourage everyone as we go to start logging whatever questions you have, and we'll turn to those as soon as we get through this short presentation. So on to the playbook that we've been talking about. So a lot of organizations have obviously been talking about their return to work in the fall. Obviously, lots still unknown, but I think most are still planning for some shape or form of returning to the office at some point. And so given the challenges that moms have faced in the pandemic, before the pandemic, the things we know, and Reshma so rightly pointed out, existed long before the pandemic, we have a moment to truly, truly look at what is it that moms need to succeed and what is it that employers can do to meet those needs. And so that's really what this playbook is about. I sort of shared a little bit about the research that went into this, but as we dug into the research, I'll just point out a couple of things that I think we heard and learned across all of the findings. One, that there's just a gap in policies and programs that are unique to mothers, and that speaks to the full spectrum of moms in the workforce. So from hourly and low wage workers all the way to white collar professionals. So there's just a gap where most of the research we see is really focused on that sort of white collar, high wage employee and not on low wage hourly workers. So that's a big gap we saw as we went into this. The second thing I would just say is, you know, nobody's getting this 100% right. What we saw are anecdotes, examples of really good practices and policies. But what you'll see as we get into this is that the integration of all of these pieces is really important. We can't just bite off one little piece of the apple. We've got to sort of figure out as employers, how do we take an integrated, holistic look at what mothers need to be supported in the workplace and be successful. So I just encourage all of us as we're going through this to think about like, how do we look at this holistically and figure out across all of these dimensions what we can do to support moms. If we can go to the next slide. As we gathered insights, again, the first thing we really wanted to understand is what is it that moms need? And so the playbook, you'll see if you haven't looked already, has sort of those 10 things that moms need. And that also led to what we called the Bill of Rights for moms. So that's in there as well. And these are the 10 things. So 1, give us control over our schedules. 2, support us with childcare. 3, own your role in shaping dynamics at home. 4, prioritize mom's health. 5, close the gender pay gap and pay moms fairly once and for all. 6, root out the motherhood penalty. 7, don't rush new moms back to work before they're ready. 8, provide better on-ramps to bring moms back into work. 9, guarantee paid sick leave. And 10, advocate for moms publicly. So each of these things apply to all low-wage hourly workers and high-income salaried workers alike. I'm going to go in a few seconds to a few of these, just so you get a better picture of like how we evaluated this, what the actual practices and policies look like. But I would just say again that you have to take on all of these things. You can't just take on one piece or another. And I think too much of what we're seeing is little pieces, answers that are addressing just one or two of these things and not a holistic picture of this. So all of these, the other thing I'll just say is that all of these are relevant, and we've thought about very carefully in the playbook, if you're a small business or a Fortune 500 or Fortune 50, whatever you are, wherever you are in that ecosystem, how, some answers are going to be relevant to you and some are going to be harder and out of reach. So we thought through the whole spectrum of what companies, regardless of size, can do to address all of these things. So I'm going to go into a couple of these if we want to jump to the first one. The first and most important thing we saw, without a doubt, was that giving moms more control over their schedules was the number one thing all moms needed. So what we learned specifically is that predictability is the thing that matters most to low wage workers, and that flexibility is the thing that's top of mind for high wage workers. And so the focus, however, in the conversation has really been on predictability. So really focusing in, as I said before, on those high wage white collar workers, and not really employee control over schedules for lower wage workers. And that disproportionately impacts Black and Latina moms, because women of color tend to be the ones that are overrepresented in these low wage jobs. So a good example of how companies can approach this predictable scheduling that stood out to us was an example from Walmart, which allows employees to swap shifts and even pick up extra shifts by using an app that they have called Core Hours for consistency. So that's an example of what's happening. But the big takeaway is that your employees will be able to work smarter and happier if they have more flexibility and control over their schedules. The second one that we're going to dive into really quickly is the childcare. So the urgent need for childcare, obviously, that we saw in the pandemic, was a top theme that emerged from the research. So 60% of moms told us that they wanted access to backup childcare, with the highest need among Black, Latina, and Asian moms. Again, this isn't surprising if you take into account that women of color are overrepresented in these jobs that require workers to be, quote, on call, and that these moms are more likely to be in single parent households and to be located in what we call childcare deserts. So as many working moms throughout the pandemic can attest, this lack of childcare support has really been a difficult and big hindrance to productivity at work. So while implementing a full on-site childcare center is out of reach for a lot of companies, there are other things that can be done to provide childcare backup, such as providing discounts, full spending accounts for care expenses, things of that nature. So thinking through how to address this need is going to be vital going into the fall, especially as companies are thinking about the potentially going fully remote again. So the bottom line, we need to offer some form of childcare support so people and moms can work smarter. The last one I'm going to go into, which is the one that I think is almost essential to all of the 10 things that we've laid out here, is rooting out the motherhood penalty. So it's not just about policies and practices. And despite the fact that there have been cultural strides that have made in the last few years, the reality is that there's still a motherhood penalty that exists for a lot of moms. And the motherhood penalty, just to be clear about what we mean when we talk about this, is they're the implicit and explicit biases that moms face. So this is like being judged as being less dependable, more emotional, less authoritative, less capable of taking on hard work. So they have kids, they're not going to be able to meet certain deadlines, or they're not going to be able to travel or go to some client meeting in the evening. And the issue is that most of the time these things aren't they're assumed, they're not actually asked. And so the offer is never actually given. So that means that fewer opportunities for promotion, high visibility projects, it impacts negative performance reviews, pay inequities, and 50% of all the moms that we surveyed say that their workplace has to address the challenge of these biases. So most moms, majority of moms actually believe that that motherhood penalty exists. The other thing that I think is really important to talk about in the context, especially if we're remaining remote, is just concerns about this rising because of the fact that all of our lives are on full display in COVID. So we're all taking Zoom meetings, we're seeing what's happening in the background, our lives are there. And we saw that a Lean-In survey last year came out that said nearly a quarter of moms now worry that their performance is being judged because of caregiving and because of this display that's happening in the background. So the other part of this is, even where there are all these benefits exist and those benefits are evenly distributed, things like PTO, parental leave, flex work, women are a lot more likely to take advantage of these benefits. And you see this most often with things like flex leave, where men want it, but women take it. Everyone likes to have flex time, but we end up punishing the women who use it. So we found that men worry that taking flex leave is going to signal a weak commitment to their jobs. Women take it because they have no choice and they have to take care of their kids. But research showed that even before the pandemic, working from home were associated with a 50% reduced rate of promotion. So that is like very, very significant, and something that's very significant that we've got to think about as we're reconstructing policy and practices. So when moms take advantage of these flexible policies, they find themselves steered into low visibility, lower reward positions, a phenomenon that a lot of people call downshifting. So the bottom line really here is we need a cultural shift, and we need more men and more leaders to model the behavior that's going to set everyone up for success. So the bottom line in this whole thing, today's workplaces aren't working for moms and really need to change. And we have this moment in time, as both Marjorie and Reshma, pointed out, and I think we all know and feel. So employers can get this right. We need to do it to make sure we're retaining this really important talent. And we need to make sure that we do this because it's right for business. It helps. Good mom policy is good for business. It's good for everyone. So we just have to make sure we get this right. So that's it. I'm going to transition into the conversation. And again, want to encourage you all to use the little Q&A button at the bottom if you have questions. We'll take them as we go. But I'm going to start with maybe a question for you, Reshma. We've been on this journey together for the last few months. What in this process was most surprising, or anything you learned that was something that you were not expecting? You're on mute.
Of course I am. First of all, I think what was sad was that it wasn't shocking. Like there was no wow, we uncovered something, that we have been fighting for these things forever. But one of the big ahas that I did have was how clear it was that, companies actually can exacerbate gender inequality at home. And that, because only 7 out of 10 American dads, take less than 10 days of parental leave, that first couple of months, I think all of us know this as moms, right? When you're negotiating, well, who's changing the diapers? Who's, packing a diaper bag? Who's buying the groceries? If there's only one parent, i.e. the mom, who's doing that work, you're going to create a culture in your home that is never going to be equal. And that directly impacts, right, your ability in the workplace to raise your hand for that promotion, or to start that company, or to go the extra mile. And so you can have a million mentors. You can have as much equality in the workplace as you want, but if you don't fix what's happening at home, you'll never fix the workplace. And the role that companies play in exacerbating that. So if you don't, either mandate all genders to take leave, or if you don't, incentivize it towards performance, or if you want to hire the guy who takes parental, who teaches Little League, but then gaslight him for taking parental leave, you're making the problem worse. And so I really think that was an important thing that like companies can pretty much do immediately. And I think part of that is saying like, you don't get to celebrate yourself simply for offering 10 months paid leave. It's who's taking it and how are you creating an environment that both parents are taking it.
Yeah, that cultural piece is just so important. Marjorie, did you want to add anything?
Add something. I think over the years, as we've looked at not just this topic, but corporate behaviors, they're very influenced by the environment in which they live. And the thing about what Rashma said that's so important is that it's not just the burden that gets lifted when you're equal partners at home. It's the cues you send to the boys you're raising and the girls about expectations and about commitments. And it's also that husband or that male in your family is going to be an employer somewhere or an employee, and it's going to influence the environment in work. And so, the idea, I wrote a book about work-life integration, and I really believe this. I think that the behaviors that you have at home really translate to the workplace and vice versa. And so if we're going to get at the root of this, I think it's really important not just to share the burden, to share the burden, so it's a little easier, but also all the cues it gets. One of the more interesting things in my long career at this point is that, there was lots of discrimination against women, and some of the people who were the worst offenders would come back and ask for if I would mentor somebody or whatever, and because they now had daughters who had gone through and they were in graduate school and they were these great performers, and they found that there was discrimination against their daughter. Well, of course, it was a learned behavior, right? But when it happens to you, you have a different view. And so that's why I think this point in time is so important, because everybody's looking for highly qualified help, reliable help at every level. And so I think that's an important point that Rashma made.
So somebody in the chat asked, while this issue directly affects women obviously alone can't fix this. So how do we get more men to stand up and join this conversation?
I think you have to meet people where they are. I think a movement like this has to be as much education as advocacy. I don't think you get more men in the game by beating them over the head. But I do think that a lot of men have noted, that this is a problem right now, and whether or not they have the empathy to deal with it is one question, but when it starts hitting the bottom line, it definitely is something that will be recognized. And I think it's really important to get those people who are cue givers to the men who would be interested in this. And this can't be a movement of women.
Right. And what's so fascinating is that I learned this at Girls Who Code, like to truly build allyship and to change things once and for all, you have to involve and invite men. And they want to be there. They want to be in the room. Like half my Girls Who Code board is men. Half of our Girls Who Code teachers are men. And so when we launched Marshall Plan for Moms, after we did that first Biden ad, the second ad we did was 50 men, celebrities, Steph Curry, Craig Newmark on down, who said, we think we need a Marshall Plan for Moms too, because we know that moms have it harder than we do. And we have to do our fair share at home. But there is something fundamentally in society that is broken. My three big top funders of our movement are men. So I think the change is happening. And I think the other exciting part of this report was recognizing the opportunity to build allyship. Like if you build an equitable workplace for moms, that benefits everyone. There's so many dads that I've talked to who said, I don't want to go back in the office 5 days a week. I've spent more time with my kids and I like that. And I want to do that. I do want to take a year off of paid leave, but when I bring that up with my manager, he laughs at me and says, well, what are you going to do? So there's a cultural shift and a cultural change that has to happen. And I think we have to continue to invite men hand in hand to build this movement with us.
And I'd say, Danielle, for the women who are listening and who are who face this, don't start late in life to recognize that you have the right to have help or partnerships. You should have these discussions before you pick your partner. I mean, love is wonderful, but I'm married now 55 years, and if it wasn't a partnership, it wouldn't have worked. And you just don't think about having those discussions in advance, but you need to.
Yeah. And I think the other point is I married one of the good ones, but he slips. And, a lot of what we are in couples therapy often about is the division of cognitive labor at home. And again, part of it was how he was raised and breaking those cycles of who's expected to do what and whose work is valued and not valued, which is why we don't value that work. We literally have no value for the unpaid labor that women do across the globe. And so I think once you start actually valuing that work, things will change. But the other thing that I've really learned too is that I think in my generation, because we were supposed to have more equitable marriages, when we had kids and we're like, wait a minute, what happened here? Like, why did everything change? We felt like that was our shame, our problem. So we continued to kind of boast about how great our partners were on Instagram and Facebook, but then privately, have these knockdown, drag out, right, fights about the laundry. And I think the revelation that I came to, especially from COVID, was that now you see everything I do and it still hasn't changed your behavior. And again, and I recognize that's not my problem. That's not my shame. That's not even his problem. It's society. And it's don't give me another job to fix my husband too, right? So it's so much more complicated and I think gnarly of a problem. And this is why this report is so important, because it's not just me or Danielle or you, Marjorie, in our marriages. We need society, we need companies, we need the private sector, we need the government. Like we have to all kind of come together and pull different levers to change.
Well, maybe we should agree when we have these discussions, we need a man on the panel.
Done.
Well, and I'm a single mom, so for me, this is all those other factors that you're talking about, Reshma, are like even more critical. And I guess that leads me, and I know there's a couple questions on the chat, but just before we jump to that, one of the things that struck me about our findings was just how obvious all of it is, right? It's nothing was revolutionary or even innovative within it. Sure, there's innovations, but why is this stuff not happening? Like, what do you both believe the biggest barriers to employers enacting these things has been?
I'm kind of struck by there was something that happened when Sheryl Sandberg wrote her book, that there was a comment in it that when she was pregnant, she had to park all the way far away and she'd walk by these empty spots right close to the building. And she thought to herself one day that, why don't they allocate some spots for pregnant women? There are empty spots and instead of make us, and she brought it up and nobody had ever thought of it. So they did it. But, it just is as simple sometimes as awareness. And I think that you live in your own skin. And this is why as more women maybe get into executive positions, this will change a little bit too. But I think that some of this is not bad intentions, it's awareness. And that's why something like this is important. Be practical and come up with some things that are easy to do. And let's at least start with the low-hanging fruit and use that to give positive reinforcement so that people can take on harder tasks.
Yeah. I mean, Danny, Danielle, I think your experience too as a single mom is so important, right? Because so much of we've been talking about solutions is like, what do we have to change in like heterosexual or two parent relationships? But it's bigger than that, and it's really societal, and it's about building support. And I think I will confess that when my book Pay Up is coming out, and I've been deep in like really reflecting upon this. But like when I would speak about Girls Who Code or Brave Not Perfect, and someone would raise the hand and say, well, how do I negotiate my marriage? I'd get annoyed, because I'd be like, no, that's not the focus. The focus is about workplace, and the focus is about what we're doing at work. It's like, this is also, there's been 100,000 HBR articles written about pay equity and mentorship and sponsorship and this and that, corner office, no corner office, but we just haven't spent a lot of time, I think, in talking about what my big reveal is, that if you don't have gender equality at home, you will never have gender equality in the workplace. And that was the first miss in the feminist movement. What's interesting is like, and it's a very uniquely US problem, because if you look at the movements that are happening in Spain, in Italy, even in India, in the Philippines, that when they talk about fighting for gender equality, what they're talking about is fixing the gender equality equation at home, whether that is changing the ratio between two-parent households, or that's getting the state to start literally giving out cash to moms for the domestic labor that they're actually doing. So we are actually in this country far behind the innovation that is happening in feminism, because we're not really addressing or giving value to that. This is not a trite problem. Like focusing on motherhood, like a lot of people say to me, why is that your next movement? What? Like, as if it's, and I get it. Like I got a million, go power, go girl t-shirts in my, closet. I don't have any I'm a mom shirts, right? It wasn't an identity that I was like, and so that is part of the problem. So I just think we're in this very unique opportunity. And I think that's what's so important. I'm so proud of Danielle and the team and APCO for literally coming to us and being like, let's do this, taking this on out of the million things that you could have taken on, and recognizing that if we can actually move the needle here on this conversation, maybe we can get to equality and finish this fight once and for all.
Well, I think all of us, as we took this on nights and mornings with our kids on top of us and our dogs in our laps, I think we all just saw and felt how important this was. So it was our true honor to be able to do this work. I want to turn to Cassandra, who asked a question early on just about the legislation. Reshma, you talked about the 4 pieces that the Marshall Plan has introduced. Can you say a little bit more on what the status is and whether there's an effort to replicate at the state level?
Yeah, so we many legislative sessions are not in session right now, so we are going to be kind of taking it on again in the fall to have Marshall Plan for Moms task force happening, at the state level, because again, you cannot change what you cannot measure. So like, I would love New York State to say, okay, we've lost X million women from the workforce. What are we doing to get them back to work? Is that subsidizing childcare? Is that retraining for people that no longer have jobs in retail and healthcare? What is it? And so we have to keep our eyes on the ball. Thank God in New York State, Corey Johnson actually has launched a task force, and Senator Biaggi has also. So I feel good that New York State can actually be a model on this. As some of you already know, federally, we're waiting to see what happens in the reconciliation bill. To see, whether there's movement on paid leave and affordable childcare. It was a huge win that we got the child tax credit done. Again, when we launched Marshall Plan for Moms in January, everybody was like, you are crazy, paying moms, what? Well, guess what, moms? You got to check, right? It happened. And I think we've recognized again that, before the child tax credit was tied to actually working in the workforce, now it's decoupled from that. So if you have a child at a certain age, you get a $300 check and you can use it how you please. And we have been capturing the stories of mothers who are using it to buy shoes, who are using it to reskill, who are using it because of the last year of hell in our education system of helping their kids read. So it's this acknowledgement, in this country. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is, like, again, we were one of the few nations that did not offer a payment for being a parent. And if you look at the UK, who has long time had a paternity maternity allowance, the labor market exodus of women was nowhere close to what it was in the United States.
It would be really interesting to have an economic analysis of what this has cost us.
Yep.
Going back from, reversing the situation to 1989, because I'm sure that number is going to be staggering. And the cost benefit of what we're talking about is, I think, a very important thing to prove, because we inherently know it's true. And Reshma, I would just encourage you, the person who asked that question, Cassandra, is a former APCO employee who's fantastic and very in the know in California. And I think you've got yourself a good partner.
Yes.
Volunteering Cassandra, because I know she has a lot of passion.
Cassandra, email me.
You can follow up.
Marjorie, I'd love to talk a little bit about the conversations you're hearing and having with executives, and whether this is actually a conversation that's happening in businesses right now.
I think this is part of a conversation. I don't really think it's a mainstream conversation, not nearly where it needs to be. The conversation's happening. I'm on a number of these CEO groups and that have met regularly during the pandemic. And I think that the thing that has been shocking to people, first of all, what is going to be hybrid going forward, and how do you motivate employees and all of that? It's been the aggregate of employees, but now there's this war for talent. And that's why I think this is a moment, because everybody is deciding. I mean, everybody had a chance to step back, and some people decide they don't want to live their life the same way. So, that they want to de-stress some things. I think for women, that de-stressing line is probably so far. And de-stressing would be a much easier thing, because the things we would think are de-stressing are probably normal for a lot of, that our benchmark, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is much different. But I do think that that's why it's a moment in time. I think everybody is kind of looking for, how do they have reliable quality workers at every level, and where do they come from, and how do you encourage people to take jobs that are there? So I think the idea, and APCO, when we looked at this ourselves, we created a new program. We haven't announced it yet, so you who are on this call will hear it first. But we're creating a program called Encore, and it's an effort to attract working moms back to the workforce, and to figure out what it would take by job sharing or by less than full-time assignments, so that women have more control over their lives, and they don't have to. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing decision. Because I know when I started working, and there were not that many working women, that one of the things it did was, it was real intellectual stimulation. And, I always wished maybe it didn't have to be 80 hours a week, but, the idea that I maybe could have done something that kept me mentally alert and fulfilled, along with the wonderful fulfillment I've had from, having a family. I think that there's got to be a way that you can balance those things. And so, if we can infuse in the discussion that these CEOs are having right now, some examples of how you can do this and how you can bring quality back. And I can't imagine any job that can't be done by job sharing with a good partner.
Yeah.
I love that, Marjorie. I think that's so smart and so powerful, and so important, because I think especially now, like, I've learned as a CEO and hiring thousands of people that, like, I'll hire a mom over anybody, anytime. That we know that probably, if you looked at the data from a performance perspective, that she's going to outperform. And I think if you offer her flexibility and to do things in a way that makes sense for her life, especially given the Delta variant and all of the uncertainty that's coming back, you might end up getting a more talented, qualified person, to do some of the work that you need to do.
There's, and I think all three of us could speak to this. there's a level of efficiency that you have to develop in order to balance these things. You cannot survive as a working mother if you're not efficient in how you use your time and how you choose to multitask. And those are skills that are very valuable in the workplace. I wrote this book about starting my own business, about 10 things I learned from motherhood that helped me build the business that is now a global business. And I really believe that. I believe that there are just a lot of things we undervalue that you learn being a mother that are definitely transferable to the workplace and make you a better employee. And vice versa.
Marcia, do you think we just messaged that poorly? Because I feel like it's interesting. We all know that's true, which is why it's crazy that there's a motherhood penalty, right?
That's literally what I was just like, yes. And men, and we find over and over again in research, right, that men are rewarded for having kids. It's seen as like adding to leadership qualities, but then there's this motherhood penalty, women are penalized. So it doesn't make any sense.
Bias from just being uninformed or, not experienced in that. Because I know that, when I was coming of age at work, the idea that I was of childbearing years was definitely a penalty when you went out to talk to people about a job. And taking a job that, you couldn't work past 6 months if you were pregnant, but that was the Stone Age, that was a while ago. So you had to lie. I mean, it was really different. And so we have evolved somewhere. And I just believe that this is the time for that next giant step forward.
You just inspired me for an ad I want to do. Thank you.
I just watched the movie Baby Boom again, which if, Diane Keaton getting kind of kicked out of her management consulting job and ends up starting her own business. But it does feel like it's the same conversation, and this is like 30 years later. So I don't know if it's the messaging or just the moment in time that we now have.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking,
between naming and blaming. I think we have to name and fame. I think we have to get some of those companies that really are progressive and have those CEOs stand up. It's what we're doing with women on boards. Trying to get more women on board. It's getting those male pioneers out there as well.
Oh, I didn't know there's a term called name and fame. I love that. I'm going to steal that from you.
Well, we have one question in the Q&A about just empathy and, what is the role of empathy and encouraging empathy in the Marshall Plan for moms? And I guess more broadly, just in this conversation.
It's interesting. I think some of the data, we've done some more data collection, and I think that the younger generation actually does have a lot of empathy for moms. And I think dads have a lot of empathy for moms too. So I think what we need though is empathy for ourselves. I'm sure like most of us, there's just every night I'm just done. And you always feel like a bad mom, like it's never good enough and it's never enough, and that you don't get to have a break. And I think when you're seeing the rising rates of alcohol addiction and pill popping, and, we have a real national health crisis when it comes to moms. And so we've been thinking a lot at the Marshall Plan for Moms on like what we can do on that, and to give moms permission to say, it's okay to say you're not okay. I keep thinking about that commercial. Have you ever seen it where it's like dads don't get vacation days? And it's kind of like, well, actually, like moms don't get vacation days. And maybe we need one. I mean, I went on vacation without anybody. For 2 days, I just sat in my bed, in the hotel room bed, and just listened to nothing. And I really feel after 48 hours, I was healed. And I wish I could give that gift to like every mom to like check into a hotel room by herself.
Well, I think part of this is knowing yourself, and when you're near that burnout, that you have to just take a break and then figure out what gives you energy and use that. Empathy is one of the 4 core values of APCO. So we like to think that male or female, that's an important value you bring to work. But I do think that, one thought I've had, I spent a lot of years feeling very guilty. And then my kids grew up and went to college. And when they came home, it was like, they would say, wow, my roommate doesn't know how to do laundry, or they don't know how to cook anything, and you realize that you're giving that by sharing the burden, you're giving things of value to your children also, that in turn help them. And now my kids are all parents, and my two daughters are working mothers. And so you can see that that some of this gets passed on, and that the guilt you feel is really self-imposed. And so I think this is what you're saying, Reshma, is we should all take note of the ability to not take this all in on ourselves. We're sometimes our own worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
We have to know how to communicate, how to ask for help, and that's important.
Well, we have 2 minutes left, and I'd love to ask each of you to have your own final word. Obviously, this is really about what employers can do. There's so much about women and moms, obviously understanding and sticking up for themselves and taking what we need. But in this moment where we know 1 in 4 women are considering leaving the labor force or stepping down their participation still, and where we see this impending continued mental health crisis, especially if we end up not returning to work again in the fall. So what is the one most impactful thing employers can do today to best support moms? If nothing else, what's the one thing? Reshma.
Do something. Just do something. You know, I mean, I obviously feel very strongly about how to undo the gender inequality that's happening in the home, and what employers can actually do to change that, whether that is, mandating parental leave, whether that, instead of subsidizing my eggs freezing, please subsidize my childcare, which will also help single moms, right? But again, thinking about what corporate America can do to relieve the gender inequality that's happening in the home. Because I think what we've all learned is that, again, the amount of domestic work that women have to do at home greatly impacts their performance, in the workplace, unless they are uber rich and they can outsource everything, with the vast majority of working women in this country are not.
Marjorie, final word.
Okay, I would say that, at this time when everybody is looking at their personnel practices to try to figure out hybrid and everything else, this should be there has to be one thing in that package of how they're making change that affects moms. Mm-hmm. If they could do one thing, because for every company it might be something slightly different. I know when we were a small business, it was impossible to have paternal leave, but we could be flexible. But then we now are able to do it because we're bigger and we can afford to do it. We made it a priority. So I think the idea of taking that one thing and making sure it's in the package. And then, Reshma, maybe there's a place on the website or whatever that companies can register the one thing that they did.
I love that.
People that we could do it.
It's a great idea. It's a great idea. Like, sure, almost like a leaderboard of like the thing that you did. I love that.
Well, I think Liz, one of our attendees, has said it really well. There's a beautiful note, so I'll just read a part of it, which is that when you give women, men, and parents the power to be architects of their own careers and lives, they then have the tools and agency to create more power and foster that in all others, their colleagues, mentees, children, families, and society at large. So I think that's a really beautiful message to end on. I really appreciate both of your leadership on this issue and support for all of us moms. And thank you. And we'll send around a link to this and a little follow-up note after, and really appreciate everyone joining. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.